Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing really good today. So I asked on Instagram last week, I think, if you don't follow me on Instagram, please go and follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Both the same name, I'll put it somewhere on the screen. But basically sometimes if I'm late with the case or I'm gonna say, there isn't one this week, I'll put it on either of those. But I've also started asking questions. So what I was gonna say is on Instagram last week I said, do you mind if I cover cases that have been covered once or twice? Because honestly when I started I was like, I'm gonna cover things that no one's covered before or barely anyone has heard of, and honestly there aren't many cases that haven't been covered. When the answers came back from the Instagram question, it was 100% yes, that people wanted me to cover cases that haven't been overly covered but maybe have been covered once or twice by other channels, because some people only watch my videos. This was a case that I found ages ago and I really wanted to do because it happened while I was alive and I just don't remember it happening. I don't remember seeing it on the news or anything. So I searched the name Joanne Dennehy and nothing came up, and I was like, yes, it's not been covered, I'm gonna do this one, I'm so excited. And then I found out when I was researching that it's called the Peterborough Ditch Murders as well. So I searched that and someone had covered it and I was like, now I'm covering it because you all want to see it. I still don't want to do cases that have been covered too much. Wow, did you hear that was my boiler. If I die and it's caught on film, someone cover my case, please. I still don't want to do cases that are overdone, but sometimes I'll just read about a case and I'm like, I have to do this, I really, really want to. So that's where I'm at. So this case is about a lady called Joanne Dennehy. Sometimes she's called Joanna Dennehy and sometimes she's called Joanne Dennehy, so I'm sorry if I jump between the two. Her mum calls her Joanna but she calls herself Joanne, so I don't know if that's something she, changed during her life. No idea. Joanna Christina Dennehy was born on the 29th of August in 1982 and she grew up in a really nice area in Redbourne in Hertfordshire, and her home life was really lovely and her school life was really good too. Her little sister Maria was really close to her. Her mum Kathy worked in the shop and her dad Kevin was a security guard. She was a really pretty little girl, as you can see from her pictures. She just looks so lovely and cute. She was intelligent, she liked sports. Her mum said she was really empathetic. If she stood on a worm she would cry. She was really just a lovely little girl. As she grew up and went into her teens, she was described as a free spirit who would stand up for herself quite a lot, and she'd also go to the park and she'd smoke, she'd drink alcohol, which isn't uncommon. But when she was about 14, she started sneaking the alcohol into school, and obviously that's when it became a much bigger problem. The people in her school started noticing that she would manipulate everyone to do what she wanted. She'd get the geekier or more intelligent boys to do things for her. She'd slap them if they didn't. So she had her homework being done to the girls, she'd make them feel really, really special, but then if they turned against her at any point, she would come down on them twice as hard and she would just make them feel like absolute crap. And she was described as a bully. She threatened to wait for people after school, just making people's lives a misery basically, if they didn't do what she wanted. She was constantly telling people to go and kill themselves, saying, oh, the world would be better without you. Especially this one girl who I saw an interview with, she really made her life hell in school and I felt really sorry for her. No time for bullies whatsoever. Obviously, if you say that to anyone, it's bad, but if you say it to someone who is going through those thoughts, they'll start believing it, and it just makes me really sad. She started getting into a lot of trouble with the police. She'd run away from her mum and dad's house, she'd steal from them. She was just turning into a not very nice girl, to put it nicely. And as a teenager she would start hanging out with older men and older boys. And one man, John Trainer, would be her first boyfriend. They met in a park when she saw the man's dog and she went over and started stroking it and started talking to them, and they had an instant connection. But she was 14 and he was 20, and some reports say she was 15 and he was 20. Either way, she was underage, she was a minor. Obviously her mum and dad really didn't want this for her, they were completely against this, but because of the way Joanne was and she was just kicking off all the time, they tried to be as understanding as they could. So they invited John for dinner, but it wasn't working out. They weren't happy with the whole situation. Her parents thought that if they maybe just, sat back and let this happen a little bit, then she would maybe finish school and start being better, because they kind of allowed this relationship to happen, but it didn't work and Joanne just got worse. At this point, there was nothing that you could do about Joanne's behaviour. She was just going downhill, wasn't having any of it. She was out of control. But her parents said maybe she will leave home and she'll come back and be happy and healthy and, you know, kind of get all the rebellious stuff out of her system. But that's not what happened. So Joanne's boyfriend John said that Joanne seemed to really love her dad but didn't like her mum so much, and one day he was told by her dad that Joanne had burned all of her school books and jumped out a window in school after taking alcohol in. So at 15, Joanne left home to go and be with her boyfriend John, and John says that it wasn't because of him she left home. He didn't make her, he didn't, you know, ask her to. She just really wasn't getting on with her parents. Her whole home life just wasn't working out and she wanted to leave. Joanne had a massive argument with her mum which caused her to leave home, and she just kind of turned up at John's, and unfortunately John's parents weren't prepared to put them both up, you know, at the same time. Don't think they were very keen on her as a person or their relationship. So they stayed in the garage for that first night, but then after that they became homeless. They had a tent in the woods. And Joanne apparently loved this life. She didn't care. She was happy to be with John, but John just really hated it. Didn't want to be living like that, so eventually they got a council house. Joanne became pregnant at 17, and apparently when she was pregnant she didn't smoke, she didn't drink, she was buying clothes for the baby. She was happy. But as soon as the baby was born, Joanne just completely changed, and she was stoned literally on the day she brought the baby home from the hospital. She'd just had a child and that was the first thing she thought about. John was pretty much left to look after the little girl by himself. She didn't really want to know. It was just another person to her. Joanne started self-harming and she gave herself the star tattoo under her eye, and she'd also start drinking like 2-litre bottles of vodka and just be walking about fine. She cheated on John as well, and she told him about it, and she was doing coke while she was cheating, and you know, just bringing that back to the house just wasn't sitting well at all with John, which is completely understandable. It's also said that he was a victim of domestic abuse, which he didn't say in his interview, but it's what I've heard, and I wouldn't put it past her. I don't usually kind of blame people for things, but you know, I really wouldn't put it past her. After 5 years of being together, John left and took the little girl with him, which I do not blame him for. And Joanne spent a bit of time back around where she grew up, and she would see old friends and threaten them in the street, like smashing bottles at them and just being a very violent and not very nice person. So John knew about all this and decided to take her back. I think he really wanted to try and help her, to be honest. He always said that even when they were younger, he just really, really loved her and just, you know, just wanted her in his life. But then it's so strange to say that because she was a minor when they started going out. It's all just very, very strange. It's a very weird situation. But after they did get back together, Joanne fell pregnant for a second time. And again, she was fine during the pregnancy, but then as soon as the baby was born, complete switch. John said she had a really strange relationship with the children. It wasn't a typical motherly relationship. She'd take them to the fields, she'd wrestle with them, she'd throw stones at cars with her children. Obviously not setting a brilliant example. It was just very strange. Joanne was on the drink and the drugs a lot still, even with 2 children at home, and she would come in, she'd still have needles stuck in her arm, she'd slump and sit down by the door and just put her head down, and the next day John left for good. He took the children, didn't want them around that kind of environment. Good on him. But Joanne apparently didn't really care. She didn't try and contact the children at all. She wasn't bothered that they'd gone. They were just other people to her. So without the chance of a normal family around her, Joanne's life of crime started gradually getting a lot worse. She was found carrying a knife, which got her in a lot of trouble. She served a short prison sentence for that. Then in 2012 she got community service for assaulting someone, and then she got a 14-week sentence for theft. While she was speaking to psychiatrists in prison, she was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which I've heard is more like a spectrum. They didn't really say where she was on it, but they said that she wasn't a danger to society. When Joanne was 30, she'd been released from her 14-week sentence from prison, and she was massively, massively manipulative, especially towards men. She was still into drugs, she was still a really violent person, and she'd actually brought the violence into her sex life as well. So one guy woke up after spending the night with her and she was carving up his back with a knife just because she wanted to see what it felt like. Sorry if the lighting's changed, I had to move a few of my lights around. They were doing weird things to my eyes. At this point, Joanne met a man called Kevin Lee, who was a landlord, and he'd let rooms to vulnerable and homeless people, and a lot of the people who went to him were actually people who'd just come out of prison. Some of them had been kicked out of their homes because of drink or drugs problems, and obviously with some of them coming out of prison as well, they were criminals. When Joanne met Kevin, she told him that she'd just come out of prison, which she had done, but it was for 14 weeks. She told him she'd been in there for 8 years for killing her father, who raped her. She also said that she murdered 2 people by setting a house fire and killing 2 more people by running them over in a car, and none of this was true. Because of the way Joanne was with men, she had Kevin Lee wrapped around her little finger from very early on, and she was able to live somewhere of his rent-free, and in exchange she would look after all of the other tenants. Not in a nice way. She would make sure that everyone paid their rent on time, no one was causing Kevin any trouble, and she'd go around threatening everyone basically. She punched one man, just knocked him out, and then the next day he packed his bags and left. She was scary and everyone knew it, and everyone was terrified of her. Kevin was 48 and a father of 2, but still he was having an affair with Joanne. Everyone was scared of Joanne. She really made herself known when she was around, and everyone around her just knew to keep their mouth shut. They knew she was trouble. One man called Chapman, who lived nearby, he complained about Jo quite a bit, and people when she first moved in didn't really know how scary she was, and they'd offer to go and have a word with her, but John just said no. John was like, no, I know that she's helping Kevin, I don't want any trouble. Kevin tried to introduce Joanne to a woman called Carla who was interviewed, and Carla went up to her very nice and said, hi, I'm Carla, nice to meet you, and Joanne apparently just said, I don't give an F who you are. Joanne put her hands around Carla's throat, and Carla had a hammer in her bag. She took the hammer out, tapped it against Joanne's cheek and just said, my darling, I'm a girl who's got nothing to lose. If you take me down, you best hope I don't get back up, and if I do get back up, you better run. I don't know if anyone does the same, but I will watch interviews with people, and just people like this really stand out to me. I just really liked her. I thought she was the coolest thing. Anyway, because of that, Joanne took her hands slowly from Carla's throat and just walked away. I would love to have been there. Like, yeah, you go. I think that speaks volumes about the kind of person she was. I think, obviously I don't know her, I never met her, but I think a lot of it was all a big front. It was a big performance constantly, which is said a lot. I'm not, not coming up with this myself. It's been said a lot that it was all a big performance, and that just shows you. It was kind of, she threatened someone threatened back, and that was it. It's like, oh, okay. She's a bully. At the end of the day, she's a bully. Joanne became friends with a man called Gary Stretch, who was a known criminal, and he was 7 foot. I don't know if Gary Stretch is his birth name, but if it isn't, like, what a name to choose. Gary had been in prison for burglaries, and while he was in prison, he actually helped murder someone. He wasn't a nice guy, and the two of them just became inseparable. They did a lot together, and it said that Gary Stretch was under the same spell that Kevin Lee was with Joanne. He would just do anything she asked him to. On the 29th of March in 2013, Kevin Lee was marked as a missing person when he didn't come home that night. His car had been found burnt out, and no one knew where he was. A man who was walking his dog around the countryside found Kevin's body in a ditch, and Kevin was wearing a sparkly black dress. And this was really weird because it wasn't anything that Kevin wore in day-to-day life. He'd been stabbed 5 times, and his heart and his lungs had been punctured, and Kevin's body had been posed. I've seen reports on how Kevin's body was posed, which I'm not going to repeat, just because he was made, even when he was dead, to feel humiliated. And I don't want to add to that by saying it on here. Does that make sense? I just don't want to. It doesn't feel right. But he was posed. I'm sure you can imagine. It wasn't nice. The police knew from the fact that he was posed and he was in this dress that it was probably someone who knew him and someone he may have had problems with. Police questioned Kevin's friends and family just to see if they had any idea if anyone would do anything like this to him, and Joanne's name came up a few times. When Kevin was originally missing, Christina, his wife, was trying to ring round everyone just to see if anyone knew where he was, and because she was ringing numbers that were on his phone bill, Joanne's number and Gary's number were 2 of those. Because Christina was ringing round everyone, 2 of the people being Gary and Joanne, their mobile data showed that they were at the location that the car was at that was burnt out. So police knew at that point who they were looking for. They did think that it was Gary who'd done all these things because Joanne typically wouldn't be strong enough to throw a man in a ditch. But Joanne and Gary were nowhere to be seen. They were on the run stealing things to live, and one of the things they stole was a camera, and they took this camera around with them everywhere they drove, and they took photos like they were on some kind of weird holiday. And one of the photos would be the most famous one in this case, which is Joanne holding a knife. At this time, a police officer in Norfolk was looking through CCTV of a petrol station because there'd been a woman who'd taken biscuits and crisps, ran out the petrol station, jumped in a car and drove off. They put the registration into a database and soon found out that it was the same people that they were looking for the murder of Kevin Lee. And what's worse is that Kevin actually bought this car that was used to dump his body. He gave Joanne the money because she said she needed a car. Because they were stealing so much and they were on the run at the same time, they needed help to sell all the things that they'd stolen. And Gary said he knew someone, and that person was Mark Lloyd. They went to a flat in Hereford, and Mark said when he went to meet them there was just tablets and TVs everywhere that they'd stolen. When he went in, Joanne put the knife to his throat and said, "Stretch is the taxi driver and I'm the one that kills people." Obviously this man was scared. There's a woman with a knife who's saying she's killing people and a 7-foot man who will do anything she says. So he decided it was best to just go along with anything they wanted. So Joanne, Gary and now Mark all got into the car and started driving around. Joanne was showing Mark the knife all the way through the drive and getting him to get out, take pictures as well, drink half a bottle of whiskey. They went to a shop to get some cigarettes after Joanne asked. Mark went in to go and get them for her, but she followed him in. There's CCTV footage of this, and she stands behind Mark as he's asking for the cigarettes, and she gives him a squeeze from the back. Apparently she was pressing the handle of the knife into the back of his kidneys to try and threaten him. And then it gets really weird because she starts flirting with the woman who's behind the counter, because at this point Mark thought she was just going to jump over and grab all the money and do something bad in the shop, but she didn't. She just started flirting with this woman, and I don't know, it's really strange the way she does it. She gets the woman to turn around, but she does this with her hand. Oh, my thing just cracked. She does this to get her to turn around. She's it's really strange. It's just really pervy and odd, but anyway. So Mark was trying to linger behind to try and not get back in the car because he was scared of what they were going to go and do, and Joanne just hurried him along and they got back in the car. When they started driving again, Joanne kept commenting saying that she wanted to have fun, and Mark didn't really know what that meant. She kept saying to Gary to find her one, and eventually Mark caught on to the fact that she was looking for someone to kill, but just a completely random person. Eventually Gary saw someone and said, "Will that one do?" and Joanne said yeah and got out. She approached Robin Beretta, who was a 63-year-old retired firefighter who was just out walking his dog. It was a really nice area that they'd stopped in. It was only about 3 in the afternoon, so there was quite a few kids around as well. She attacked him from behind and stabbed him twice, and Gary and Mark were in the car just arguing. Mark was saying, "What are you doing? Why are you letting this happen?" And Gary was just saying, "There's nothing you can do, you've just got to let her do her thing." During the trial, Robin told the jury, "I felt a blow to my right shoulder. I turned around and saw this lady. She just stared straight through me. I kicked her and made contact. It had no impact on her. She just came straight towards me. I ran into the road. I put my hand to my jacket and saw all this blood. She tried to come for me again. I kicked her again. She still didn't react." Robin Beretta said that after the attack, she just walked calmly back to her car and got in. He saw Gary stretch because he said that she got in with a very large man. And she kissed him on the cheek and just said thanks, and then they drove off. Joanne was really hyped at this point. She wanted to do it again, and they drove round in the search for another victim. She said she didn't want women or children, she wanted a man, and specified she wanted a man with a dog. And they found one, and it was 56-year-old John Rogers, who was a lovely man, just kept to himself and playing his guitar. He was stabbed 40 times in the back, chest, stomach, arms, and she literally stabbed him in the back, turned him over and did the same to his front, just repeatedly stabbing him. John said that the first contact felt like a punch in the back. He thought it was just a friend or a neighbour messing about. I turned and saw the woman who stabbed me just standing there. She started stabbing me in the chest. He looked at her and said, "What's this all about?" And she just stared back at him and said, "You're bleeding. I better do some more." He said, "Just leave me alone, please, please can you leave me alone?" But she didn't. He just lay there and thought he was going to die. The stab wounds had punctured his lungs. He didn't know what to do, so he just crawled about 100 yards to a path where the members of the public came and started trying to help him. And then she took his dog. She just took his dog with her and calmly got back into the car and just went, "Oh, I've got a new dog." Then said, "Let's go to Tesco's." They carried on driving and Joanne was still looking for more victims. Mark said that he could hear sirens now all around them and getting closer because the police knew who they were looking for. They knew the vehicle and they were tracking them down. They parked up at some shops and that's where the police finally caught up with them. Joanne was sat in the car, still holding the knife and covered in blood. She was just completely calm, waiting there to be arrested, and I think if she hadn't been arrested there and then, she'd have definitely killed more people. Gary Stretch had fled the scene, they couldn't find him, they didn't know where he'd gone. And as I said before, at first the police thought that Gary was the main person involved in this, that he'd put Kevin in the ditch, and really when they saw Joanne they were a bit shocked. They were not expecting this, they thought that maybe she was getting dragged along to do all this, but then there she is holding the weapon that has just been used to attack these two poor men. She was arrested for these two attacks and also for the involvement in Kevin Lee's murder. They caught up with Gary, who was arrested too, and he was an experienced criminal, so he was very chummy with the police. He was doing everything they wanted him to do, but he wasn't going to say things if he didn't have to, and he didn't want to drop Joanne in it. But eventually they realised that she was the main culprit in all of this. So they take her to the police station, and the CCTV of all of this as well. You can see Joanne just smiling, joking, dead cheerful, and she's flirting with all of the police officers. She's leaning on the desk, she's flicking her hair, she's trying to make everyone laugh. She makes a horrible racist comment, which I'm not going to put in here because I just don't have time for that. She compared murdering someone to going down for a Sunday roast. She was loving all the attention that she was getting, and also she was asking where the dog was, even though she just attacked two men in the street. That's what she cared about, where the dog was. The dog wasn't hurt in any way, she knew it was fine, she was just asking where it was. And for the first time in about 10 years, her parents were informed of her whereabouts because they had no idea where she was at this point. Her mum found out first and then had to tell her dad, so they had to kind of know that that's what she'd been up to all this time and this is what she's doing now. In the interview room, her attitude changed a little bit. She was just saying no comment to everything, and because of how charismatic and everything she was before, they thought that she'd be really enjoying the chance to tell someone the story of all this. The police then received a call that John Chapman's body had been found in a ditch, just like Kevin Lee's was. John Chapman was the one who'd complained a bit about Joanne when she first moved in to the people around. Then more or less straight after, the person on the other end of the phone said, "There's now two bodies in the ditch." And this was aside from Kevin Lee, it wasn't counting Kevin Lee. There was Kevin Lee who'd been found, there was John Chapman, and then there was someone new who they didn't know who it was. Because of how similar the attacks were and how they'd all been left in the ditches, they knew that it had something to do with Joanne and Gary. John had actually been missing for 5 days and then he's found there. Soon they found out that the body next to John Chapman's was Lucas Slabojewski. He was a 31-year-old Polish man who had family in Peterborough and he was a warehouse worker. He was a known drug user and they think that that's how Joanne knew him. And shortly after the two of them met, he was calling Joanne his girlfriend. On the night he died, Lucas went to a cash point and then he went to meet Joanne at one of the landlord's properties. They'd been sexting each other and they were meeting up to have sex. Lucas had been stabbed by Joanne and one of the stabs had pierced his heart. It's said that the attack started in the bathroom and then moved into other rooms in the house, so it was a long and drawn out attack. Joanne and Gary cleaned up the scene, Gary being the more scared to be caught. But even though they cleaned up the crime scene, Joanne actually went round telling people that she'd killed this man. She kept his body in a wheelie bin because she just didn't know what to do with it for a while. She took pictures of it, she was laughing because his head was sticking up out of it, and she even showed a 14-year-old girl where she was keeping the body. She was so proud of it. She was like, "Oh, come and see what I've done." 10 days after the first murder, John Chapman's attacked. Joanne went round and threatened to evict him, and then John started drinking with friends. Now Joanne knew that John was a drinker and it said that she used this against him. She knew he was vulnerable and that he really liked his drink, so when he drank too much he would pass out, and then that's when she attacked him. He was lying on his bed when Joanne got on top of him and started to stab him. She stabbed him 6 times with the same knife that she'd used to kill Lucas, and that's when she apparently texted Kevin to offer him a night he'll never forget. It said that she got Kevin to wear the dress, trying to mask that as some kind of sex thing, and then that's when she attacked him when he was lying down. And again, her and Gary Stretch clean up the scene. Even though they'd cleaned everywhere, there was still a big blood-soaked mattress, so they just put it in the garden. They took Kevin in his car and went and dumped his body, then set fire to the car. They took Lucas's body and dumped him in a ditch. Then they went back to get John's body and they went and dumped him with Lucas. From there is when they went on the run and started taking all the photographs. Then they got Mark involved and the 2 attacks on the men who were walking took place. And then they were arrested. So that's kind of the timeline of how everything happened. Joanne's pre-trial was on the 18th of November in 2013 in the Old Bailey in London. Because Joanne in her interview had said no comment to everything, they thought that it would be a really, really long trial, like weeks, months, just trying to get any information out of her. They thought she would deny absolutely everything. After literally 10 minutes of being in there, Joanne was asked how does she plead, and she just said guilty, 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 and just started shouting it. And even her defence team didn't know that she was going to do that. A lot of people think she did this to, you know, firstly to shock everyone, to be in the limelight, and to gain some control over the situation. Her defence team actually had to say to the judge, you know, we weren't expecting this, we didn't know she was going to do that. This isn't what we prepared for, basically. Then on her trial on February the 28th of 2014, she was given life in prison. And Joanne Dennehy is only one of 3 women who have ever been given the life sentence in the UK. The other ones being Myra Hindley and Rose West. They said she was cruel, calculating and a manipulative serial killer. Gary Stretch was charged with 3 counts of preventing the lawful burial of a body. He was found guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder, which were for the men who were attacked on the street. And he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 19 years. He got this sentence because of the attacks on the men who were walking, because he saw what Joanne did to the first one but then still took her to do the other one. 2 men, Leslie Layton and Robert Moore, were also given sentences for helping Joanne move the bodies. One was given 3 and one was given 14 years, and I don't know which is which, but they were in trouble as well. Mark was let off with everything. He didn't have a case to answer to. He was just being dragged along and he didn't do anything wrong. He does say now though that Joanne had ruined his life. He did have a criminal history, but he was getting his life back on track. He was about to get a job, he was clean, he was doing really well, and then all this happened and his life was dragged back down. So right now Joanne is in jail and she writes letters to a lot of men from jail. It's kind of like Ted Bundy. Everyone thought he was great, people were in love with him, and the same thing has happened with Joanne Dennehy. Loads of men really like her and find her attractive. I'll never understand why people feel that way about killers, but yeah, it's a thing apparently. It's a gross thing, but it's still a thing. John Trainer said that he would support the death penalty for Joanne. He said that she's not the mother of their kids, she was just a donor in that situation. Her dad said he hasn't spoken to her and he doesn't want to see her. And Joanne's own mum said that she deserved what she got and she doesn't want her to ever get out because she fully believes she'll do it again if she can. She said that the world is better without Joanne in it, that Joanne just doesn't exist to her anymore because she's not the same person. She said that her daughter is the girl who left home and never came back. So that is the case of Joanne Dennehy. I really hope you liked it. I know I'm always trying to find reasons for why people do these things, but for this one especially, I don't know what happened to her. She just seemed like such a nice child and then just completely turned. And again, not defending this woman, say this in every single video. I don't want people to come to my channel and be like, oh, there's the girl that defends all the killers. I'm not like that at all. I just feel like something must have happened. To me, people don't just change like that. Something had to happen to her in her life to make her so evil. But on the other hand, what do I know? I am not a psychologist. Maybe people are just born that way, but I cannot imagine it. I just can't. So I'd love to do more of these cases that I've found and I've loved but not wanted to cover because I've already kind of seen them online. But these ones are my favourites, the ones that I've kind of clung to for years. As long as they're not too well known, I'd love to cover them for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't followed me on Twitter and Instagram already, please do. I upload a new true crime video every Sunday, so please like and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying really hard to get my watch hours and my subscribers up because one day I want to be monetized. That would be lovely. Thank you so much for watching. Leave me a comment, tell me what you thought of the case, and I will see you in my next one.